I want you to close your eyes for a second. Picture a wedding reception. It's 1999, maybe 2003. Doesn't matter where. New York, London, Tokyo. The speeches are done, the cake is cut, and everybody is on the dance floor. Grandma, the grandkids, the cousins you haven't seen in 5 years.
Yeah.
The DJ puts on a track, and the energy in the room just lifts. It's Step in the Name of Love.
Or the remix to Ignition.
Or the remix to Ignition, absolutely. Or maybe it's the end of the night, everyone is swaying, arms around each other, and it's I Believe I Can Fly.
It was the soundtrack to American Joy.
Yeah.
That is really the only way to put it. It was the sound of celebration, of graduations, of family reunions.
Exactly. It was ubiquitous. And the guy singing that song, the guy conducting that joy. As we sit here recording this in early 2026, that man is currently sitting in a 6x8 cell at FCI Butner in North Carolina.
And he's not just sitting there for tax evasion or, a probation violation. We are talking about a combined 31-year federal sentence.
We're racketeer.
For sex trafficking.
Welcome back to The Deep Dive. I'm your host.
And I'm ready to get into this. But I have to say, looking at this stack of sources you've prepared, this is a heavy one. Today, we're opening the funnel on Robert Sylvester Kelly.
R. Kelly. And honestly, looking at this research, it feels like we're looking at two completely different people. I mean, two totally separate lives lived in one body.
It's a binary.
It is. We have the king of R&B, the musical genius who sold over 75 million records, the guy who wrote for Michael Jackson and Whitney Houston. And then we have inmate number 096270035.
It is the ultimate Jekyll and Hyde story of the music industry, maybe of pop culture entirely. But here is the thing we need to stress right at the top. It's 2026 now. The dust has settled on the trials.
Yeah, this isn't breaking news.
No. He's been incarcerated for several years. We had that massive health scare last year in 2025 where reports suggested he nearly died from blood clots. So we aren't just speculating on a current scandal. We are effectively looking at the obituary of a career.
That's the mission for this deep dive. We aren't just recounting the crimes, though we have to go there in detail, and we aren't just praising the music. We need to figure out how these two things existed simultaneously.
In the same person at the same time.
For 30 years. How did the industry let this happen? How does a guy write a song that gets sung in church while running what the feds called a criminal enterprise to exploit women and children?
And we need to get technical today. We have to. We need to talk about the music theory, the chord progressions that made him a genius, and the specific legal structures like RICO that finally took him down.
We need to look at the money, the enablers, the NDAs, the whole system that protected him.
The whole apparatus.
So buckle up. This isn't just a story about a singer. It's a story about power, talent, trauma, and the total catastrophic collapse of a cultural icon. Let's start where every superhero or supervillain story starts.
The origin. Section 1. The South Side of Chicago.
Set the scene for us. Because R. Kelly didn't just appear on the Billboard charts out of a vacuum. His sound, his whole persona, it was born out of a very specific time and place.
No, absolutely not. He was born January 8, 1967, Hyde Park area, but he grew up in Bronxville, specifically the Ida B. Wells hums. Now, for listeners who aren't familiar with Chicago housing history, the Ida B. Wells projects were intense.
This wasn't just poverty.
No, it was more than that. It was a very specific ecosystem of survival. It was a city within a city with its own rules, its own dangers. It was built with the promise of being good, affordable housing, and like so many of these projects, it became a symbol of systemic neglect.
And the family dynamic. I was reading the notes on his autobiography, Solar Coaster, and it sounds just completely chaotic.
Chaotic is putting it mildly.
Yeah.
His father was completely absent. Kelly didn't really know him, has said as much. He was one of 5 siblings raised by his mother, Joanne.
She was a school teacher, right?
A school teacher and a devout Baptist.
Yeah.
And that duality that defines his entire life. It starts right there in the living room.
The Baptist influence.
Huge. His mother's record collection was his first real education. We're talking Stevie Wonder, Donny Hathaway, Marvin Gaye, Sam Cooke. He was soaking up that soulful, spiritual sound. He was learning melody, harmony, how to emote.
The gospel roots are all over his music, even the most explicit stuff.
They are. But outside the front door of that apartment, and sometimes inside it, things were incredibly dark. The trauma was, it was profound.
I want to pause on the trauma here because the details in the source material are harrowing.
Right.
And I think they are crucial to understanding the man he became. We have to be clear, this is not an excuse for his crimes.
Not at all. It's context.
It's context.
Yeah.
And in his book, he details incidents that would break an adult, let alone a small child. Let's start with the story of his first girlfriend, a girl named Lulu.
He was only 8 years old. And he tells this story about them playing by a creek. Some older kids started a fight over the play area, and in the chaos, Lulu was pushed into the water.
And she drowned.
The current just swept her away. He watched her die. At 8 years old, he's called her his first musical inspiration, which is just, it's heartbreaking. But the trauma wasn't just this accidental tragedy. It was systemic abuse.
This is the part of his own writing that is really, really difficult to read.
It is. He writes about being exposed to sexual situations way too early. There's a disturbing account where, again, at age 8, he was coerced into photographing sexual acts between adults in his household.
Wait, hold on. At 8 years old, he's being forced to take photos of adults having sex.
That is what he claims in his own book. Think about what that does to a child's understanding of sexuality, of boundaries, of what's normal. It completely demolishes it.
It's grooming, essentially.
It is, and it gets worse. He alleges he was sexually abused by an older female family member from age 8 to 14 and by a male family friend around age 10.
You know, we often hear the phrase, hurt people, and we have to be so careful not to use trauma as an excuse for his later crimes. But when you look at a child being sexualized and victimized before he even hits puberty, that rewires the brain.
It absolutely does. It creates this deeply warped understanding of power, intimacy, and control. He wrote that he never told anyone because he was too afraid and too ashamed.
That's shame.
That shame metastasized. It likely fueled the controlling, predatory behavior we saw later. It's not a stretch to say he was reenacting those power dynamics, but this time he was finally the one in control.
There was physical violence, too. That wasn't sexual. The shooting incident.
Right. At age 13. Kelly's version of the story is that he was shot in the shoulder while riding his bike, trying to stop a theft. A hero narrative.
But there's another version.
And this is so typical of the contradictions in his life. A family friend later claimed that Kelly's mother disputed that story. She allegedly said the gunshot was self-inflicted.
A suicide attempt.
That's what the friend claimed. So either he was a victim of the brutal street violence of his neighborhood, or he was a 13-year-old boy so desperate he tried to take his own life. Either way, this is a kid in profound crisis.
A kid in crisis who couldn't read. That's the other piece of this puzzle that I think is so important.
It's huge. He was functionally illiterate due to severe undiagnosed dyslexia. He talks about the humiliation of it in school. He couldn't escape into books. He couldn't do well in his classes. So his world is this combination of violence, abuse, and academic failure.
So how does this kid, dealing with all this horror and the inability to read, find a way out? Because usually this story doesn't end with 3 Grammys. It ends with prison, which, ironically, it eventually did. But there was a massive 30-year detour in the middle.
The detour came from a teacher, a music teacher named Lena McLean at Kenwood Academy. She was a legend in Chicago.
What did she see in him?
She saw raw talent. He entered high school in 1980. He was shy, hiding in the back, always wearing sunglasses to hide his eyes. Maybe to hide the fact he couldn't read the board. But McLean heard him humming or singing and realized what she had. She heard the pitch, the tone.
And she pushed him into the talent show, right?
She practically forced him. The story goes that he goes out there wearing those signature sunglasses and he performs Stevie Wonder's Ribbon in the Sky.
Which, as a vocalist will tell you, is not an easy song. The runs in that song are incredibly complex. You have to have perfect control.
And he nails it. The crowd goes wild. He wins first prize. And after that, McLean sits him down and tells him, you need to quit the basketball team and focus on music. This is your gift.
She was the first person to tell him he had value outside of the trauma, outside of the violence.
She was. She saw the genius before anyone else did. She gave him a path. But even with her support, the academic struggles were too much. He didn't graduate.
He drops out.
No, he dropped out after his freshman year. And this leads to the image that I think is so cinematic, so crucial to his story. After dropping out, he's not in a shiny studio. He's under the Chicago L tracks, specifically the Jackson station on the Red Line.
I can picture it right now. The noise of the train rumbling overhead, the grime, the cold in the winter.
And he's down there with a bucket or a cheap keyboard, just busking. He's singing for loose change, just trying to eat. He's mimicking percussion sounds with his mouth because he couldn't afford a drum machine.
So he's beatboxing.
He's beatboxing and singing. And that's where he honed that voice. He had to learn to project over the roar of a commuter train.
Oh.
That's where the power in his vocals comes from.
So let's move to section 2, the ascent. Because he doesn't stay underground for long, how does he get from the subway to the spotlight? What's the first step?
It was a grind. But the breakthrough came with a group he formed called MGM Musically Gifted Men. They went on a TV talent show called Big Break, which was hosted by Natalie Cole.
So, like, the American Idol of its time?
Basically, yeah. It was 1990.
Yeah.
And they won the grand prize, $100,000.
For a kid from the projects who was singing for change under a train track, $100,000, that's like winning the lottery.
It's life-changing money. It gave him the breathing room to record proper demos, to get a manager, and by 1991, he gets signed to Jive Records.
And Jive was a big deal at the time.
Oh, yeah. Jive was a major player. They had fresh acts. They were on the pulse. Kelly started with the group Public Announcement. The album was born into the 90s.
This was the New Jack Swing era. Explain that sound for people who might not remember it.
Think Teddy Riley. Think Bobby Brown, Guy, Belle Biv DeVoe. It was this fusion of traditional R&B vocals with hard hip-hop beats. It was high energy, heavy on the drum machines, lots of dance moves. It was the sound of the early 90s.
And it was successful. She's got that vibe, Honey Love, those were hits.
They were hits. But Kelly realized pretty quickly that he didn't want to split the check 4 ways. He saw himself as the star, and he went solo.
And in 1993, he drops 12 Play. And this is where I want to pause and really dig in, because Bump and Grind wasn't just a hit, it was a monster, a cultural phenomenon.
It spent a record-breaking 12 weeks at #1 on the Billboard Hot R&B Singles Chart. 12 weeks. That's a quarter of a year. No one could touch him.
Why? What was he doing that was so different? What was the formula?
That's the music theory part that I think is so fascinating. Before R. Kelly, you had 2 lanes in black popular music. You had hip-hop, which was aggressive, street, masculine. And you had traditional R&B Luther Vandross, Freddie Jackson, which was suits, ties, flowers. Very polite romance.
Oil and water.
Completely.
Yeah.
R. Kelly was the emulsifier. He took the thug aesthetic, the baggy jeans, the Timberland boots, the attitude, and he combined it with these lush, gospel-influenced chord progressions.
Go deeper on that. What do you mean?
Okay, listen to the actual chords in Bump and Grind. If you just play the piano part and you take away the explicit lyrics, it sounds like a church hymn. It's built on these progressions that are designed to make you feel something deep and soulful. It hits that spiritual center of the brain.
But then he layers these incredibly explicit lyrics on top. My mind is telling me no, but my body is telling me yes.
Exactly. He's hijacking the religious, emotional part of your brain to sell you raw sex. It was a chemical reaction for listeners. He called it the R&B thug persona. He made it okay for the guys on the corner to listen to love songs because they still felt hard. He cracked the code.
And the industry loved it because it sold like crazy. 12 Play went 6x platinum. But then, looking at the timeline, the pivot is just insane. 2 years later, in 1995, he releases the self-titled album, R. Kelly. That sells 4 million copies, more hits. You remind me of something.
Down Low, Nobody Has to Know, another classic.
But then 1996 happens.
The Space Jam soundtrack.
I Believe I Can Fly.
It is arguably one of the biggest songs of the 20th century. It won 3 Grammys. It went to #1 in the UK. It was played at elementary school, graduations, weddings, funerals, the Olympics. It completely rebranded him overnight.
He went from Sex Me and Your Body's Callin' to I Believe I Can Fly. That range is baffling. How does one artist contain both of those things?
And that's when he started calling himself the Pied Piper of R&B.
Which, knowing what we know now, is one of the single creepiest nicknames in the history of popular music.
It's chilling. The Pied Piper literally lured children away from their town. At the time, Kelly claimed he meant it as, I can lead the world with my music. But in retrospect, looking at the constant allegations of grooming underage girls, it reads like a confession hidden in plain sight.
And in 1998, he drops R, the double album. This is peak ambition.
A double album is a statement. It says, I am an artist with a capital A. And it had everything. It had I'm Your Angel with Celine Dion. It had When a Woman's Fed Up. And it had I Believe I Can Fly on it as well. It solidified his status as a global superstar.
We also need to talk about his power as a producer. Because I think people forget that he wasn't just winning for himself. He was the engine room for the whole industry.
This is the why. This is the answer to the question. Why did the labels protect him for so long? Why did people look the other way?
Right.
Because he was a hit-making machine. He wrote You Are Not Alone for Michael Jackson.
Which holds a Guinness World Record, right?
The first song in the entire history of the Billboard charts to debut at #1 on the Hot 100. He did that for MJ, the king of pop.
Unbelievable.
He wrote for Whitney Houston. He wrote I'm Your Angel, a massive duet for Celine Dion and himself. He wrote for Britney Spears. He launched Aaliyah's entire career with Age Ain't Nothing But a Number. a title that we will definitely have to come back to.
So if you're a record exec in the late 90s, R. Kelly isn't just an artist on your roster. He is a revenue stream for your other biggest artists. He's an asset.
Correct. He's an economy unto himself. If you cancel R. Kelly in 1998, you aren't just losing his next platinum album. You're losing the next hit for Celine, the next hit for Britney, the next potential smash for whoever you're trying to break. He had made himself indispensable.
Let's move to Section 3, the Pied Piper era. Because as the fame got bigger, the behavior got stranger, the eccentricity just went completely through the roof.
It did. The money was flowing, the yes men were surrounding him, and he was living in this bubble of his own creation. And we have to talk about the basketball career.
Please, I still can't believe this was a real thing.
In 1997, at the height of his fame, he signed a professional basketball contract with the Atlantic City Seagulls of the USBL, the United States Basketball League.
This wasn't a charity game. He was on the roster. He got a jersey.
He was on the roster. He wore number 12 for 12, play, naturally. And he actually played. He wasn't terrible. He had a decent jump shot. But the contract had the most R. Kelly clause ever written.
The Whitney Houston clause.
The Whitney Houston clause. It stated, in writing, in a legal document, that he could leave the team immediately, no questions asked, if Whitney Houston needs a song written.
That is the ultimate flex. Coach, I can't run drills tonight. Whitney needs a bridge for her new ballad.
It shows his priorities, but it also shows his delusion of grandeur. He truly believed he could do anything, be a pro athlete and the world's biggest singer-songwriter simultaneously.
Then came the Jay-Z collaboration, the best of both worlds.
On paper, this was the Avengers, the king of R&B and the king of hip-hop, the two biggest stars of their genres, Chicago and New York. It should have been the highest-grossing tour of all time.
Instead, it was an absolute disaster.
A total train wreck. The 2004 tour, which was the second attempt, was plagued by tension. Our sources say Kelly was erratic, he was paranoid, he was showing up late for shows, or not at all. He felt Jay-Z was trying to upstage him.
And then came the Madison Square Garden incident.
The infamous pepper spray incident.
You can't make this up. Kelly stops his own show, mid-song, claiming he sees people with guns in the audience, which security later found no evidence of. He's ranting, he storms off stage.
And backstage, there's a confrontation. Jay-Z's longtime friend and business partner, Taryn "Ty" Smith, ends up pepper spraying R. Kelly and his bodyguard.
The headliner got pepper sprayed at his own show at Madison Square Garden.
Yes, by a member of the other headliner's crew. Kelly was kicked off the tour immediately. He sued for $75 million. The suit was eventually dismissed, but it ended the project for good. Jay-Z called it a gift and a curse.
And I think it was the first time the public really saw that R. Kelly was becoming impossible to work with. The genius was tipping over into something else.
Paranoia, volatility. And speaking of bizarre, Trapped in the Closet, laughs, the hip opera.
I remember when this dropped in 2005, I couldn't look away. It was like a car crash you had to watch.
Nobody could. It's a musical soap opera, chapter after chapter after chapter. It started with a simple one-night stand, and it ended up with, what was it? A midget in the kitchen cabinet.
A pastor named Reverend Mosley.
A cop who was cheating, everyone pulling guns on everyone. It was
campy, right? It felt like he was in on the joke.
That's the thing. It was hilarious, but Kelly played it completely straight. He called it an alien level of genius. He really believed he was creating high art. It highlighted his storytelling ability. The guy could rhyme a phone book, but it also showed how detached from reality he'd become. He was living in this soap opera world in his head.
And despite all this madness, the numbers held up for a long, long time. Billboard named him the #1 R&B artist of the last 25 years in 2011.
And get this, even in 2025, years after his convictions, years after he was in prison, Billboard still ranked him 9th on their best R&B artists of all time list.
That 2025 ranking is fascinating.
It proves that strictly from a data perspective, the sales, the radio play, the chart dominance, he is immovable. You cannot tell the history of 90s and 2000s music without him. But that brings us to the hard part of this deep dive, the part that was running parallel to all this success, all this eccentricity.
Section 4, the dark history. Because while he was getting pepper sprayed and writing about midgets in cabinets, there were very serious, very dark allegations accumulating. And they had been for a long time.
It goes back to the very beginning of his solo career. We have to talk about Aaliyah.
The age ain't nothing but a number era, a title that is just gut-wrenching in retrospect.
In 1994, he produced her debut album. She was a phenomenal talent, a star in the making. She was also 15 years old. He was 27.
The mentor-protege relationship.
That was the public story. The private story is that the source material confirms a marriage certificate was found. They were illegally married in Rosemont, Illinois on August 31st, 1994. The certificate falsely listed her age as 18.
So they forged a legal document to marry a minor.
The marriage was annulled months later in February 1995 by her parents. But think about that. A 27-year-old man marrying a 15-year-old girl. And the industry knew it was an open secret. Vibe magazine published the marriage certificate.
Then what happened?
Nothing. Aaliyah's career took off. Kelly's career took off. Nobody stopped the money train.
Then in 1996, a year later, Tiffany Hawkins sued him.
Right, a civil suit. She alleged a sexual relationship started when she was 15. That suit was settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. Money changed hands. Non-disclosure agreements were signed. And this became the pattern, the fixer era. Allegations would pop up and they would be quietly handled with money and legal threats.
But the dam really broke in 2002, or at least we thought it did. The sex tape.
The timing on this was incredible. It was right before he was scheduled to perform at the opening ceremony of the Salt Lake City Winter Olympics. A huge honor. And then a videotape surfaces, anonymously sent to the Chicago Sun-Times, allegedly showing Kelly urinating on and having sex with an underage girl.
And this wasn't just a rumor in a magazine. He was indicted. 21 counts of child pornography.
It was a massive, massive trial the world was watching. But it dragged on for 6 years. The indictment was in 2002. The trial didn't actually happen until 2008.
6 years. Evidence gets old, memories fade.
Exactly. And he was acquitted. I think a lot of listeners remember the verdict, but don't understand how. How do you get off when there is a tape?
So break it down. What was the defense?
It was a masterclass in defense strategy and a catastrophic failure of the justice system. His lawyer, Ed Genson, used what some called the shaggy defense. It wasn't me. They argued the tape was too grainy to definitively identify Kelly. They brought in experts to say you couldn't be sure it was his mole on his back. They created reasonable doubt.
But the key was the victim, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was the nail in the coffin for the prosecution. The alleged victim on the tape, Jane Doe, refused to testify against him. There was speculation she'd been paid off or intimidated. Without her testimony, the prosecution's case fell apart.
And the jury bought it.
They found him not guilty on all charges. And Kelly walked out of that courthouse, held a press conference, and went right back to touring. He released albums. A few years later, in 2013, he worked with Lady Gaga on the song Do What You Want. It felt like he was Teflon. Nothing could stick.
So what changed? Because for almost another decade after that acquittal, he was untouchable.
The culture changed. The hashtag #MeToo movement in 2017 shifted the entire baseline for what was acceptable. People stopped accepting open secrets and boys will be boys.
And specifically, Black women started organizing.
That's the crucial point. The Mute R. Kelly campaign, launched in 2017 by Oraniki Odolai and Kenyette Tisha Barnes. They weren't just tweeting. They were targeting the money.
How?
They systematically pressured corporations, Spotify, Apple Music, Pandora, Ticketmaster, radio stations. They organized protests outside of his concerts. They said, if you continue to profit from this man, we will boycott you. And it started to work. Shows started getting canceled.
So Kelly panicked.
He panicked. In July 2018, he released a 19-minute song called I Admit.
19 minutes. I listened to it for this deep dive. It's a breathtaking document.
It's a 19-minute rant set to music. It's a stream of consciousness, defense, confession, and pity party all in one. He admits to being broke. He admits to infidelity. He admits to being a dog.
But the chorus is so misleading. He sings, I admit it, I did it. But then in the verses, he explicitly denies the most serious crimes. He denies pedophilia. He denies the existence of a sex cult that a BuzzFeed report had just exposed.
He plays the victim. He says he's being crucified by the media, that he's being extorted. It was his last attempt to control the narrative.
But defiance didn't work against the documentary, Surviving R. Kelly.
That was the nuclear option, released in early 2019 by Lifetime. It wasn't just a news report. It was a 6-hour, multi-part docuseries. It centered the survivors. It showed their faces, their families. It showed the parents crying, trying to get their daughters back from what they called a cult.
It made it impossible to look away. You couldn't just dismiss it as rumors anymore.
Overnight, the entire support structure for him collapsed. RCA Records finally dropped him. Lady Gaga publicly apologized for working with him and pulled their song from streaming services. And most importantly, prosecutors in New York and Chicago felt the public pressure to reopen the files and take a much, much harder look.
Which leads us to Section 5, the fall. And this wasn't another civil suit that could be settled with a check. This was the feds.
He was arrested in July 2019, and the charges were devastating. We're talking about RICO.
Now, I watch a lot of mob movies. When I hear RICO, I think of The Godfather or Goodfellas. Why were they using a law designed to take down the mafia against an R&B singer?
That was the brilliant strategy by the prosecutors in the Southern District of New York. RICO stands for the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. It's a tool to dismantle a criminal enterprise.
Break that down. What does that actually require prosecutors to prove?
Usually to convict someone of a crime, you have to prove they did the specific criminal act with their own hands. But with RICO, you just have to prove that he was the leader of an enterprise that existed for the purpose of committing crimes.
And the enterprise in this case was his entourage, his whole operation.
Exactly. The managers, the bodyguards, the drivers, the runners. Prosecutors successfully argued that R. Kelly Inc. wasn't just a music business. It was a machine designed to recruit, groom, traffic, and silence women and girls.
So give me an example.
Person A, a runner, scouts a young girl at the mall or after a concert. Person B, an assistant, gets her number and gives it to Kelly. Person C, a manager, arranges the flight to whatever city he's in. Person D, a bodyguard, enforces the silence and the rules once she's there.
So even if Kelly himself isn't booking the flight or making the first contact,
Because he's the don of this criminal family, he is legally liable for the actions of the entire enterprise. It was genius because it allowed them to bring in decades of behavior stuff that might have been past the statute of limitations on its own and use it as evidence of a pattern of racketeering activity.
and it worked. The jury saw the pattern.
In September 2021, the New York jury found him guilty of all counts, including racketeering and 8 violations of the Mann Act for sex trafficking. Then in 2022, he was extradited back to his hometown Chicago for a second federal trial.
And what was that one for?
That was specifically for producing child pornography and for child enticement related to the 2008 case that he had been acquitted of. They basically got a second bite at the apple, and this time they won. He is found guilty.
We need to be specific about the sentence here because the math is a little bit complex. It's not a simple addition.
It is not. The New York judge gave him 30 years in prison. Then the Chicago judge gave him 20 years. But, and this is the key part, the Chicago judge ruled that 19 of those 20 years would be served concurrently with the New York sentence.
Meaning at the same time.
Right, so only 1 year from the Chicago sentence was added on consecutively or after the New York sentence is done. So you take the 30 years from New York, you add that 1 extra year from Chicago, and the total sentence he has to serve is 31 years.
He's currently at FCI Butner Medium in North Carolina. He's in his late 50s. A 31-year sentence that is effectively a life sentence.
For all intents and purposes, yes. Unless something drastic changes on appeal, he will die in prison.
And that brings us to the now, Section 6. The recent developments in 2024 and 2025. Because his legal team has not been quiet.
No, not at all. In July 2024, Kelly and his new lawyer, Jennifer Bonjean, who is very well known for taking on these high-profile, difficult appeal cases, petitioned the Supreme Court to review the Chicago child pornography conviction.
What's their argument? What grounds are they appealing on?
It's highly technical, as these things often are. They are arguing about the statute of limitations, about whether certain evidence should have been allowed in court, and about the definitions under the Mann Act for transporting minors. They are trying to find a legal loophole to get a retrial, or at the very least, a reduced sentence.
Is it likely to succeed?
The Supreme Court agrees to hear only a tiny fraction of the cases brought to it. So it's a Hail Mary, but they are throwing it.
But while the lawyers are fighting in the courts, his body seems to be quitting on him. The health scare in June 2025 was major news.
It was. Reports came out that he was hospitalized following an apparent medical emergency in prison. His defense attorney, Bonjean, claimed he had been placed in solitary confinement and given anxiety medication that caused a severe adverse reaction.
They mentioned blood clots, right? That's incredibly serious.
Extremely serious. They reported he collapsed in his cell, lost vision, and doctors at the hospital found blood clots in his lungs and his legs. That is life-threatening. A pulmonary embolism can kill you instantly.
And his team's claim was that he was sent back to prison too soon.
Yes. They claimed he was returned to the general prison population against medical advice. It paints this picture of a man who is frail, aging, and physically deteriorating. The Pied Piper, who once played professional basketball, is now, by their account, struggling to survive.
It's a grim, grim ending to the story.
It is. The final chapter.
So let's bring this deep dive home. We looked at the boy from the Ida B. Wells projects who had this generational God-given gift. We've looked at the global superstar who defined a genre for more than a decade. And we've looked at the convicted felon, the predator. When you synthesize all of this, what are we left with?
We are left with a tragedy in immense proportions. A tragedy for the victims, first and foremost. Their lives were altered forever by his abuse. But it's also a cultural tragedy. You have a man with a talent that comes around once every 50 years, 75 million records sold, the production credits, who used that very talent and the same and power it brought him to facilitate these monstrous acts.
The Pied Piper wasn't just a catchy nickname he gave himself.
No, it became a dark, twisted literalism. He used the music to lead the children away.
And here's the final provocative thought I want to leave with our listeners. We mentioned that Billboard ranking from 2025, number 9 all-time R&B artist. And the Recording Academy, the people who give out the Grammys, stated officially they wouldn't strip him of his 3 awards. They said, and I'm quoting here, "History is history."
Right. They can't unring the bell. The songs exist.
So the question is this: can the music ever truly be separated from the man? The industry that eventually condemned him, dropped him, and testified against him still ranks him as one of the greatest ever, based on the data. So if you, listening right now, turn on the radio today and Ignition Remix comes on, or if you're at a family reunion this weekend and Step in the Name of Love plays, what do you do?
Do you walk off the dance floor? Do you change the station? Or do you separate the art from the artist? That is the question. The art exists independent of the artist, but in this case, the artist used the art as a tool to commit the crimes. It's a moral knot that I don't think we can ever fully untie.
A heavy thought to end on. But that's what we do here. We look at the facts, the timeline, and the context. You draw your own conclusions about legacy and accountability. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.
Stay curious.
See you next time.